Hey there, welcome back to Farmcraft. Work continues on this old case excavator that I am returning to service. This is a 170B, which doesn't follow the typical numbering convention of excavators. This is about the same size as a Cat 335 excavator. And a quick recap, so far I have removed two very leaky hydraulic cylinders, rebuilt them, and reinstalled them. I repaired a very leaky hydraulic line that has a fitting that was no longer available. Many of the fittings on this machine are in old style, and that makes for some unique challenges. I changed the hydraulic oil filters and topped off the tank and had some fun. I gave it a little tidying up. That only took 3 days. And a few other things like this hydraulic tank breather and this air filter housing cover. And some new belts. And now I want to move on to the elephant in the excavator, the swing bearing. Every time I swing in this machine, it makes a terrible noise. I asked the owner when I bought it, and he didn't really have any information for me on it. The first thing I tried was to completely grease the swing bearing. I grease a little bit, rotate it, grease it more, and make sure every part of the bearing gets a good dose of grease. Unfortunately, that made no difference whatsoever.
I want to get some of the stuff off of this swing bearing. Basically, I want to feel the grease and see if I can feel any metal bits in it. So I've gone most of the way around the swing bearing. The seal feels good the whole way and there's no metal chips. That's pretty reassuring, actually. So another couple things I want to do to check this swing bearing out. I'm going to check the play in it. Now, I'm not sure what it's supposed to be, but I mean, this will give me some idea. So what I've got here, dial indicator. The base is on the undercarriage, the indicator is on the house, and the only thing that can move in between is the swing bearing and whatever little flex there is in this metal. Not much. It's in about the middle of its travel, so what I'm going to do is push down with the boom so that I get maximum compression here. Then I'm going to pick up the boom and get maximum expansion. Actually, no, I said that backwards. If you push down into the ground, this is going to open, and if you pick the boom up, then this is going to close. So let's see what the difference is between those two.
Alright, so a full turn on this indicator is 100 thousandths, and I want this to be less than 250, so that means it needs to be less than 2.5 turns. So I start it up, and I push down against the ground, and it only moves 20 thousandths, like 21. Okay, so now I pick it up, and it takes me a little while to get the boom fully extended, but I end up at 25. So my total travel is 45 thousandths. I am well within spec. I'm really shocked with that. That is, that's like brand new swing bearing. Huh. So now I'm going to use my mechanic stethoscope, which you can point at different things and hear where the noise is coming from. So there are my two swing motors. I'm going to check both of those, and then I'm also going to check the swing bearing. So I've got Jennifer in the cab doing the swing for me, and I'm using this stethoscope listening to both swing motors to see if I can localize the noise. Unfortunately, it is so loud and it just sounds like it's coming from everywhere. I can't really isolate it. I got under the machine and tried to listen there as well. I really thought this would help me isolate the problem, but I could not tell one way or the other where that noise was coming from. So there's the two swing motors, and they have a swing brake assembly in them. I believe it's this section on top. That is definitely a possible culprit for this. These lines, this right here, ties into the other swing motor right there. Those are supposed to pressurize and release the brakes. And those are done with an electrically actuated solenoid. So I haven't showed you guys this yet. This is the electrical box, hence the do not spray. Screwdriver makes a nice key.
And here's what we see in there. First glance, it doesn't look too bad, but I see many missing fuses. Things are bent. I see that fuse is blown, but it comes down to a relay that's not there. And these relays, man, I don't know if they've been desoldered. It really does not look factory to me. You know, sometimes you'll have relays that aren't populated because there's an option that wasn't there, but I don't think it would look like that. This one definitely is all scuffed up. Someone's done something with that. Another missing fuse, and look down in the bottom here, we have several relays that look like they probably came from areas on that board. This guy maybe went there. What is that? Signal flasher. Well, I don't need a signal flasher. Hopefully these are things like lights and stuff that I'm not going to care about, but I suspect I have some electrical issues. So the first thing I need to do, look over the wiring diagrams and see what's missing here and what it should be running. But my first priority is the swing brake. If I can verify that it is getting power to the solenoid valve, that should get an electrical signal to disengage the brake whenever you're doing a function on the machine other than tracking. So basically anything with the boom, the bucket, the arm, or swing, the swing brake should be released. When you're tracking, it keeps the brake engaged so that if you're on a hillside and just going along, the front doesn't want to swing down. And for the record, I did price a new swing bearing. I was actually able to find a used one. They claim it's used with plenty of life left in it. I don't know how they know that. Don't know if I really believe them. But it was $3,300, which is pretty reasonable. This thing is, what is it? It's like 5 feet across. Yeah, it's 1.5 meters outside diameter. It's a big bearing. And I found a company that makes them custom, and a new one would be right around $6,400. Both of those are not cheap, but given what it is, and given how cheaply I got this machine, that is within the budget. I haven't decided which one I would do yet. The used one, they said, had a 30-day money-back guarantee, so I don't know what they'd do about freight, though. But if they ship it to me and I could take it apart and look at the balls and the races and see how it looks, and if it looks okay, put it on. If it doesn't, send it back. I don't know. I might not need a swing bearing. Let's see if it's the brake or the motor or something else. It's official. I'm an idiot. Some of you don't like it when I call myself an idiot, but it's true. We're all idiots. If you're working on stuff, you're going to make mistakes. Accept it and move on. Well, I guess this wasn't a horrible mistake. It could have been a doozy. Let me show you. So I was getting ready to do some troubleshooting. My idea was, this is the control valve for the swing brake. This blue hose is supposed to be pressurized with hydraulic fluid over to the swing motors to release the brake. And I was going to pull this electrical connection off and see if I was getting voltage to engage this valve and send the pressure. If I was getting voltage, then I was going to actually put a pressure gauge on this and see if I was getting hydraulic pressure to the motors. And that would allow me to narrow it down. Is it the valve? Is it the motor? Whatever. Was just getting ready to do that, and I thought, you know what? Let me read up on this thing a little bit more. Because here in the cab, there's all these buttons, and you can kind of see a little bit on the screen. Just can't tell what these things are. And I asked the guy about it. He said he really didn't know. Him and his employees would just fiddle around with the buttons, was kind of what he said. And he kind of thought most of them don't do anything. So what I've noticed is when I turn the key on and do this one, that lights up. And I looked in the book, that's the heavy lift mode. That's supposed to increase the hydraulic pressure and allow you to lift more weight than standard mode. But it doesn't seem to change anything in how it functions. So I'm not sure it's actually doing anything, but it's not something that I see myself needing. The rest of these functions, the only one I found that did anything is this, and that is, in that position, it won't track. In this position, it will.
The rest of these didn't seem to do anything. They didn't seem to do anything. Well, I got out the old operator's manual and I started looking through. It shows you all the warning lights. Here's a bunch of the switches. 21 is the heavy lift switch. 22 is for track cleaning. Headlamp, flood lamps. And I paged through this thing when I first got this manual a couple weeks ago. Flow control switch, I've tested that, it doesn't seem to do anything. I kind of scrolled through this and swing brake switch. 1 is on, 2 is off. Down is on, up is off. It has a manual swing brake. It's that switch right there. The swing brake is now on. The swing brake is now off. Do you really think it's that simple? Let's give it a test and see. So that should be swing brake on. Did that fix the problem? So it turns out the guy was right. He's just flipping the switches and it doesn't really do much. But I am feeling much more confident that that is going to be the problem, because it definitely made a difference, at least for a little while, and then the brakes seemed to come back on. That's interesting. So there's still something wrong with it. So maybe I'm not entirely an idiot, but I definitely should have known that it had a manual swing brake. All right, we're gonna start troubleshooting. All right, here's our electrical connector for the swing brake solenoid valve. I figured I had two options here. I could either check the electrical input to the valve, or I could check the hydraulic pressure after the valve. Either would give you a lot of information, but I decided to go with the electrical because it doesn't tend to spill oil everywhere. So we've got 3 connections. This right one actually looks like it's been a little bit burned. It's kind of interesting. Something tells me we didn't have a good connection here. There's only 2 wires. So yeah, looking at this, the wires were in there like that. So my green wire went to the melted terminal, which was on the left, like so. Yeah, I think the first thing I'm going to do is test it. Let's just go ahead and hook it up and make sure we have connection here and see if that fixes my problem. I bet it will. There, that temporarily should be hooked up. So let's see what happens if we try it now. These things aren't just a flat blade, but one of these regular connectors, as long as you face it the right direction, actually goes on very well and tight. And I just need to make those two connections. So that's what I'm going to do. We're going to combine it with some heat shrink. Yeah, I think that's going to do nicely. Keep in mind, this thing is undercover. It's not going to get rained on even. The only other thing I might do is just put a little piece of wire to just hold it so that it can't get pulled off inadvertently. Swing bearing. Well, let's not call it swing bearing. Swing noise is fixed. How cool is that? So if you're wondering, I did have a plan for the swing bearing. What I was going to do is build up some, I have some like 8x8 hickory chunks. They're huge and heavy and strong, and I was going to stack up cribbing all the way up to within a bottle jack height of the counterweight. And then I was going to take two 20-ton bottle jacks and position them, you know, right underneath the counterweight, so that I then had the ability to lift the back of the machine and everything's safely supported. But I wouldn't lift it yet. Then I would go in, I would undo all of these bolts, and then I would also have to go up underneath into my favorite place and undo the bolts on the other side, because one side of the bearing is bolted down to the undercarriage, the other side is bolted up to the house. So you got to unbolt both of them. Then, once I had that done, I would have jacked up the back a little bit, get some tension on it, maybe have it pitched a little, I don't know, I would have to see how things were going. And then start up the machine and push down with the arm and basically lift the house off of the undercarriage. Then I would take my little excavator from here. Once I had a gap in here, I actually would have done more cribbing between the house and the tracks, so that couldn't move. And then I would have taken my small excavator, chains, whatever, maybe made a little piece of plywood so I could slide it, but basically slide that bearing right out the side. That was my plan, and then put a new one in. But I don't have to do that because the swing bearing's not bad. You know, I know you guys want to see that. I could do it just to show you, just for fun. That is not happening. Honestly, part of me was looking forward to the job, but a lot more of me is relieved that I don't have to do it, because that was going to be one bear of a job, and I have too many other things to work on. I wouldn't mind doing it really if it needed it, but I'm not going to do it for fun. All right, with the swing bearing no longer an issue, I think the next most pressing thing is this oil cooler. I'd really like to get the engine so that I can change the oil and it's not leaking. And then after that, it would be the turbo. There's no real instructions in all of my manuals on this oil cooler. This is all I see as this one exploded view. And it just looks like there's two long bolts holding it on. Could everything be happening? Yeah, I guess it could all be happening in there. If that's the case, it's almost certainly leaking internally, which means new oil cooler. But let's pull it off of there, and then maybe I can pressurize it and just verify where it's leaking. All right, here's the oil cooler. I really can't tell how difficult this is going to be to get off. But let's start out taking the oil filter. Ah! Probably hadn't been off there in a couple decades. Yeah, I have a feeling the engine oil was also topped up right before I bought it. And the reason the engine oil is good is because it's all new too. Can you guys even see what I'm doing? Yes, I'm using a chain wrench to take off an oil filter.
He's moving. I've got the oil catch pan under there. So I'm going to let it sit there and drip for a little bit, and then I'm actually going to screw it back on and punch a hole in the bottom and drain the filter out, because this is just really an awkward position. I'm going to end up dropping that filter when it's full. That wouldn't be fun. I mean, I screwed it back down to the base. Let's see if we can punch a hole in the bottom. This is just a giant nail. There we go. I've actually got some work that I need to go do for the cows. So I'm gonna go do that while that's draining. I'll see you guys back. So in theory, if I take these 3 bolts off, the oil filter housing should kind of hang there because it's attached to multiple things, but the oil cooler, once it separates from the gasket, should come out, in theory. Ooh, it moved. And it's going in the pan. Imagine that. Gonna need to take that off, I think. Birthed it. I'm not going to be able to show you because I can't see, but I've got to plug the corresponding holes into the oil filter housing. Yeah, those don't even feel round. Yeah, they definitely are not round. So I'm not just going to be able to plug those. It'd be quite a bit of work to take this thing all the way off. It'd be great if I could actually power wash this, but I don't think I'm going to be able to. What I can do though is cover everything up as best I can and clean it by hand and then brake clean it all. There you can see each individual cylinder and what do you call it? I mean, basically it's the block. Inside this is a sleeve and then a piston, and then there's a separate one for each of the 6. And then a separate head. That's a separate head there. Pretty cool. So I'm trying to see where this oil cooler might have been leaking. So this is the actual leak right along there. And it does not communicate with this whole area. And these are the only inputs and outputs. The gaskets looked pretty rough, but the oil that's around this is all when I took it off. I don't think it was leaking over here. Yeah, I can even see there's a dry area between this and down here, and it was leaking out of that. So I'm pretty sure it was not the gaskets or the way it attached where it was leaking, which almost certainly means I'm going to need a new oil cooler. But let me clean this thing up and see if I can come up with a way to pressure test it. All right, I've got it somewhat cleaned up. As far as pressure testing it, these little holes are just bolt holes. They don't need to be covered. It's this, and I think that goes, I can see that it goes down into here. There may be a check valve or something in there. I'm not sure if this is a thermostat mechanism here that decides whether or not the cooler is functioning. Don't know. But basically, if I put some rubber that covers this hole and that hole, it's the same on the other side, and then a steel plate and a C-clamp, the whole thing should be closed off. And then
there's a plug right there, and that communicates with this. So this goes into the oil. So then I can just use my air gun and blow in there. And we'll see if we can hear a leak. We might spray some soapy water on it, but yeah, this shouldn't be that hard. I suspect we're going to find one, and I mean, you can see the way this thing, it's all welded up. You're not fixing that. I think there's a leak down in there. And yeah, I'm probably going to need a new one. Luckily, they are available. I'm not leaking here. I can definitely hear something there. Curious to see if I can get soapy water to do anything. Oh yeah, see? It's not much of a leak, but it doesn't take much. So I'm going to order a new oil cooler.
Do you want water? We'll wait for her to be done. That's a good boy. Waiting your turn. I'll wait until it's my turn to drink. Number 61 getting curious. Yeah. You and that calf. You're both droolers. Mom says I was a little too close, Dozer.
I just slept on it, and I am going to go ahead and pull that oil filter housing off of there so that I can clean this properly. And you know what? While I'm here, I'm going to take this fuel injection pump off and I'm going to send it to Area Diesel. I want this engine to run tip-top. This isn't my John Deere 1010 that I was kind of playing around with and wanted to tear into it myself and see if I could fix it. I learned a couple of things on doing that fuel injection pump repair, and that is that they are very complicated. There is a lot of knowledge necessary to do it right, and you need a test stand because there are adjustments on here that there's no way to adjust unless you have the equipment to measure what's going on and do it right. And I just don't have that equipment, and I will never have that equipment, but Area Diesel does. So I've talked to Kurt over there, and he's happy to take a look at this. I'm going to send this over to him, and we're going to get this pump running exactly as it should. So hopefully that's going to help with our smoking issue and our power issue. I'm also going to pull off the injectors and send them to him as well. We're going to make this thing run right, the way it's supposed to. That's the fuel shutoff. This thing is right in my way, so let's get rid of that. Why are you gonna be so uncooperative? Come on. Man down. First casualty. Hate it when I break things. In there. It doesn't look too hard to fix.
That's weird. That did not seem like diesel fuel at all. That seemed like water. Tell you what though, whatever that did, it wasn't doing it well. Yeah, that's water. Interesting. Top of the fuel filter comes around and goes right there. Same place this little hard line does, going over to that sensor back there. This, I'm pretty sure, is the fuel return. Goes back to the tank. This is main fuel from the tank. That line's all cracked, so I'm probably gonna either cut that off or maybe replace the whole line. And this one goes like to the side of that filter housing. So let's get those off of there, and we're gonna be close to taking this pump off. That's diesel fuel. I turned off the fuel supply from the tank, so it shouldn't drip forever. Trying to drop it. This looks like it should have a wire on it, doesn't it? I don't know what that is. Come on. Now this is the main supply from the tank. There's a ball valve on that, and I closed the valve, so it shouldn't leak but so much. That one's 18, this one's 19, the others are 17. Alright. Ow. Let me get my hammer. Here's the filter housing, and rather than messing with that, since I've got these lines disconnected, if I take those two bolts out, the lines, the housing, the filter, everything goes together. So I'm just going to take it off. That'll make things easier. And here's the filter and housing. All right, this ought to be a good indication of if I have any water in the fuel or not. Doesn't look like it. A little bit of debris, but no water. So that's good. All right, I know what you're thinking. I need to put the engine at top dead center before I pull that pump off. And that may be true, but it may not. I'm not sure how this pump attaches. It might just be a Woodruff key, in which case there's only one way for it to go, and you can just pull it out and put it back in and line up the key. But I have discovered that I have to come in from the other side. We have to come in from the back to release the drive shaft of this pump. Yeah, this got a little more involved. I'm gonna have to rip through the whole belts and belt tensioner and everything again. But that's all right. Let's go get it done. Okay, here's your tensioner. Interesting. How much to it? Now I need to get this little cover plate here. Huh. Got it. Lost it. All right, so here's the deal. Through there, I don't know if you can see on camera. Yeah, you can see that. You can see the gears. Well,
The gear on the left is the injection pump gear, and the one on the right is the timing. I need to find timing marks and line them up so that that'll put me at top dead center. And then I can undo the bolts on that, and then the pump should pull out the other side. So I'm going to sit here and rotate this engine until I can see timing marks on those gears. And it's not so easy to see. So this took a while. I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you, but you might actually be able to see this way. Those marks are lined up like it says in the manual, and I took some time and confirmed that I am at top dead center because there's two marks. See those two right there? There's two sets of marks on that gear, and I had to make sure I was on the right one. But I am at top dead center on cylinder 1. So this engine is at top dead center, and we are okay to take the fuel injection pump off. So I can now reach in here and undo these bolts. Those bolts are out. Unless there's one in behind that's absolutely impossible to get to. Oh, they wouldn't do that, would they? They might. I mean, there's room for a big long extension behind that. I just don't know how I'm going to get a look. Borescope it is, I think.
No, they didn't put one bolt back there that's impossible to get to.
Huh. I think there's two bolts. I think those are grime-covered bolts right there. All right, so I am trying to get on these nuts. These nuts back behind this. And it's kind of like magic. I'm on one. Did I get it, or did I just come off of it? Got it. There, that's the view I have. You can see the one that I took off really easily. Just down and right of it is the next one. Feels like it's on. Oh yeah, pump moved. There it is. Can you see it? There it is. Whew. There's one more hose on this thing that I neglected to disconnect before. Ow. Now that one's got engine oil in it. Apparently this pump gets lubed with some engine oil. Should come out. And it did. That was easy. So that is the other side of that gear that we took those bolts out of. And here's our victim. You think I ought to clean that up a little bit before I send it over to Area Diesel? Nah, they'll be all right. You know, the sediment bowl looks remarkably clean inside. It's interesting. Parts of this machine are, obviously neglected, but then like the fuel tank and the hydraulic tank were spotless. I don't know. Weird. Got the worst of it off at least. I'm going to take that off so that it's not sticking out so far during shipping. Well, that's interesting. Is it just a valve? I think it is. I think it's just a valve. Now we get to get these injectors out. The fuel line came off pretty easy. Alright, there's our injector, and as I feared, there's no way to grab that thing other than those threads. I thought that was going to be the case. So, they make a special tool for it. By they, I mean me. Let's go make one. Injector puller and a slide hammer. Could use a bigger slide hammer for these. Well, that looks a little rough. Probably a good thing that we're doing this. It's like our bushing broke. So if you look in there, you can see all the junk that ends up knocking off of the injector as you're pulling it out. So yeah, I gotta vacuum that out. Well, that looks a little better. And you've probably noticed, some of you, that I already did this one. That's because I needed to verify it was at top dead center. So I did piston 1. That one. That comes right off. That comes right off. So this one. Piston 5 has the line coming up from the injection pump, so it actually has 2 banjos on the bolt and a longer bolt with double holes. The bolt here only has 1 banjo and it's got just 1 hole.
on the bolt. So remember that. Hey, that one came out easier. Well, I'm glad they're not all as hard as that one. There it comes. All right, we won the battle in the end. You were the only casualty. Sorry about that. One thing you may not realize is I'm working down below like ground level for me because I'm sitting on this. I have to lean over this thing. You know, this thing is a good 30 inches deep. So it's almost, well, it's nowhere near as bad as a boat, but it's not the easiest place to work, that's for sure. And when you stand up, you always have to remember there's a nice drop right behind you. That would stink. Looks like we got a red and a white. Red is on top. Probably doesn't matter. But... You all right? You look okay. So that is an oil pressure sensor. So now I just have one more banjo bolt, these two heater lines, and that'll come off of there. Should have loosened all these before I started pulling it apart. So we got a crow's foot wrench here. Let's see if we can give this thing a little taste of the impact. Okay, that's off. So here's this lovely guy, and you can see why I couldn't just plug those holes back there. Couldn't even get a look at the gasket or anything, so glad I took it off. I'll get it cleaned up good. Now we're at a point where we can reasonably clean this whole area. Everything's out of the way. Oil filter housing's gone, oil cooler's gone, injection pump is gone. I have to assume that was leaking because that thing is just caked. Let's check this
Oh, not even tight, not even close. I need to hold it in position while I tighten it. She's tight now. So I did hear you screaming at the screen to put new copper washers on that. I don't have any right now. If I can get some before I put this pump back on, I will do that. But that thing was so loose, I have no doubt that's why it was leaking. All right, that's about as clean as it's going to get on my watch. That's good enough for me, and I have to think that's probably better than most people would have done. But I'm happy with it. Yeah, I decided I'm going to soak this thing in diesel fuel overnight and then really flush it out tomorrow. Poor man's part washer. So this is the diesel fuel that was in the 1010 when I got it. It's pretty old and kind of rank. Will work as a solvent, but I don't really, I mean, I would burn it in a machine, but there's no reason to when I need it for a solvent anyway. For stuff like this. Let that sit like that overnight, and then we'll get it cleaned out tomorrow. That looks a lot better already. All right, that's quite a before and after. Well guys, I wish I could get it all back together and run the engine all in one video, but it's just not going to happen. This video has gotten pretty long. I'm going to send these parts, the injectors and the pump, off to Area Diesel Service. Big thanks to them. I know they're going to do a great job refurbishing all of that, rebuilding the pump, and when I get them back, the injectors and pump are going to work exactly how they're supposed to. And then I want to put the engine back together and run it before I start messing with the turbo, because I want to see if it made any difference. I find working on engines a lot more interesting when you do it that way. I mean, I could tear the whole thing apart and do it all at once, and yeah, I guess it would be faster. I feel like I learn more when I kind of do it in a stepwise fashion. There's a lot more that needs to happen with this thing. I've got to do the hydraulic oil cooler. That's getting pretty high on the list. Work will continue, but work on the engine is going to be held up for a little while Area Diesel Service is doing their thing. And they're going to put out a video, which I will link to as soon as it's available, on rebuilding the pump and fixing the injectors. I'm excited to see that. So there you go, guys. The beast of a content provider continues, and it looks like will continue for the foreseeable future. I do have some other things that I'm working on while I wait for things, but getting this project done is my top priority right now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.